Hello. Hello. I'm Howard Goldfein, past president of ASEF, and it's a great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Michael Weisberg. I've known Michael for more than 10 years when we discovered a mutual interest in celebrating the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth, which was in 2009. So at that time, we got together and explored the possibilities, and through Michael's amazing ability to organize all the different communities at Penn, this came off as the first ever year of something, and it was the year of evolution. And yeah, we had a symposium, we had speakers all year long, and we both were justly proud of the result. Michael is a professor and chair of philosophy at Penn. He also serves as the editor-in-chief of Biology and Philosophy and co-director of the Penn Laboratory for Understanding Science and the Galapagos Education and Research Alliance. Since coming to Penn in 2003, he has served as chair of the graduate group in philosophy. His education was a BS in chemistry and a BA in philosophy from the University of California, San Diego. And he continued his graduate education at Stanford in philosophy. After earning his PhD in 2003, he came to Penn, and his research focuses on methodological issues arising in the life and social sciences. His research group aims to develop a comprehensive understanding of public understanding and misconceptions of scientific issues, and that's the main topic of his talk today. His group has recently completed the most comprehensive study to date of North Americans' attitudes about and knowledge of evolutionary biology, and they're working on experimental documentary film techniques to enhance public understanding of science. He also leads a group that's involved with getting communities in the Galapagos involved in helping science understanding of nature and the special conditions in the Galapagos. He's been a speaker at BBC's Up All Night, the AAAS, the National Academy of Sciences, and meets with park officials, naturalist guides, and tourists in the Galapagos. So please help in welcoming Michael Weisberg.
Thanks. Very generous. Thank you so much. Thank you all for, whoa, this is, hold on a second. There we go. This is really a pleasure to be here. My wife asked me, how did you end up having this gig? I said, well, Howard is one of the few people I can't say no to, starting with 10 years ago when we organized the Year of Evolution, which was a really great, I think the best of the theme years. And really, it was I think the only one that really involved the faculty in a substantial way. The rest have been very undergraduate focused. So it was a great event. And I got, I'm a philosopher of science focused especially on evolutionary biology, but I go one button lower here. I got really involved in these issues, the public understanding of science, in another Pennsylvania event, which I hadn't yet known Howard, but I think that's how we met, which was the Dover case. So some of you might remember in 2006, there was this creationism case in Pennsylvania, and I was a pretty young assistant professor, and Paul Snigowski, who's now the dean of the college, and he was, I think, a recently tenured associate professor, and I were like, well, we should start some trouble here. And so, we had a minor role to play. The real heroes of that case were the teachers, but there's been this long tradition of people in my field, philosophy of science, getting involved in combating creationism, to put it bluntly, and that kind of sucked me into this world. And so that's what I want to tell you about today. I would be happy to come back and do the Galapagos talk another day, and happy to take you all there too. That's what we could organize it for your organization. We could organize a special trip. I do that sort of thing too, so we can discuss at the break. But let's talk about understanding and accepting evolution. So, of course, I needn't tell This group, that evolutionary biology is one of the great achievements. It's one of, if not the unifying scientific principle for biology. And when I say evolutionary biology in this talk, I don't mean anything very, very profound. I don't mean exactly how adding linkage disequilibrium into two locus models violates Fisher's fundamental theorem. I just mean like the world is 4 billion years old, that there's common descent, that common descent explains homologies. This is a Galapagos picture. I threw that in for Howard. These are lava cactus growing on Fernandina Island, basically growing on more or less bare rock. But the undergraduates like this picture for its phallicness. But they are really cool adaptations. So evolutionary biology is what explains adaptations. It is the principle of natural selection is what explains adaptations, and also phenomena like adaptive radiation. Again, here, Galapagos finches. But acceptance of evolutionary biology in this country, as I'm sure you all know, is very low. So this is a graph from the data that the Gallup organization has collected from 2000. This one only goes up to 2014, but they go back. They started asking the same question in the early 80s. This is a previous generation of creationism cases. That was the case in Arkansas. McLean versus Arkansas is the case. And so around 1982, they started asking every single year whether people accepted evolution. I'll talk about the exact wording of the question a little later. Excuse me. But there are three answer choices for Gallup. There's a creationist answer choice, a kind of standard naturalistic evolutionist answer choice, and they give a kind of wishy-washy theistic evolution choice. And if you look, the red is the creationist, the green is the theistic evolutionist, and the purple is the naturalistic evolutionists. And what's really remarkable, first of all, is that acceptance of evolution is under 20%, at least according to Gallup, but also that it's very stable through time. And there's a little jiggle here and there, but basically, this is a very stable phenomenon over the course of many decades. And it's not as if every issue that Gallup polls is like that. So here's gay marriage over a much shorter period, and you see this massive change. So there's something interesting about evolution that seems to really be blocked in people's imaginations. And in addition to this, one of the things that we know is that knowledge of evolution is also poor. So acceptance is low and knowledge is poor. This is actually a kind of complicated question. This is from a study of Harvard undergraduates, and they were asked, they're given a scenario, something like Kettlewell's moth experiment, where the observation of the change in coloration of the moths over time, and they were kind of it was verbally described, the process of adaptation, and they asked them, was it more like, did the population change like this or like this? So of course the correct answer is the one on the left, the variational explanation, but most Harvard undergraduates think it happens something like this. The whole population changes together. So my group got really interested in this question because ultimately we all as educators want to change these things, but there's something going on and something blocking the very noble attempts of lots of people, including lots of great documentary makers and lots of great exhibits at museums and lots of great high school teachers to be able to change the public's attitudes about evolution. So what we really want to know is what people know about evolution, what do they accept about evolution, and how these two things relate. Just to kind of warm us up a little bit, one of the things that my group has done is used something that's sometimes called mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative methods together. So as you'll see as we go through the talk, some of the main public surveys in this area, like Gallup, the questions are not very good. And there's lots of reasons that they're not very good, but one of the reasons they're not very good is they don't spend a lot of time talking to people and actually hearing what they have to say. So one of the things that we've done is to talk to a lot of people first before writing our survey questions. Part of that's just strategic. It's extremely expensive to run surveys with nationally representative samples. Not medical school expensive, but social science expensive. But the other is just we think it can enrich. So just to give you a sense of how low understanding is, this is from a college, this is from an undergraduate. I think animals started actually at a cellular level, believe it or not, and then those cells became more complex, and it probably started with marine life in the water. And those marine lives basically evolved into being animal form, so through evolution. Okay, so this is a Penn undergraduate. This is a transcript, which is why it's written in so bizarrely. But it's like okay, but not. what you would hope that a Penn undergraduate might know about evolution. Okay, so like I say, the three goals here are really to try to find out what do Americans think about evolution, what do they know about evolution, and if we can do something to improve understanding and acceptance. So let's go back to Gallup. So as I say, that Gallup question that is stable through time, what exactly do they ask? They ask, which of the following comes closest to your views on the origin and development of human beings? Option 1, God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years or so. Option 2, human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God guided this process. And option 3, human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God had no part in this process. So these are the answers I was labeling creationist, theistic evolutionist, and naturalistic evolutionist. Now, notice something about this question. This is a question and a set of answers designed to provoke a strong response. I mean, the Gallup organization is not a scientific organization. They do perfectly adequate work, but they are a news organization, so they're trying to drive headlines. They're trying to polarize people. So this is a good way, we know just kind of from, casually that it's human evolution that's the most difficult for people to accept. And one of the reasons that, again, just anecdotally we know that people have trouble is because of the relationship in people's minds between atheism and evolution, since 97% of people in this country say that they're theists of some sort. So putting the question like this, where you sort of are inviting people to say, I'm an atheist, in order to take the kind of normative scientific answer, that just at least suggests to me that this was provoking people. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to try to come up with a better answer. Sorry, my computer's acting up. Anyway, that's what we saw before. So one of the first things we tried to do in our surveying, this is just the results I showed you before, is to try to say, well, how are people understanding the acceptance question? Is there a range of answers that people naturally have? And so just going to show you some more of our surveys, just because they're so funny. Here's another student. Evolution to me, I think, is always moving forward. I never thought that deep about it. I think you just have to keep on moving on and bettering yourself and people. Sounds like a Penn student, right? I think animals started actually at a cellular level, believe it or not, and this is the one we saw before, except, oh no, it didn't. Yeah, it started with marine life in the water, and those marine lives basically evolved into being animal form. So through evolution, so cellular. But again, the main thing, can this all be from God? Probably, yeah. Another version. It's basically based on wear and tear that happened based on events on Earth. This is our Lamarckian here. Different species developed at different pace, and eventually human intellect becomes more sophisticated based on the multiple events that have been seen, and some of the species mutated to a different path, and then hence we all existed at this moment with this complexity. Okay, so, they're sort of circling around something that's kind of evolution, but, see, it's, all right.
Were you all 10 students?
No, sorry, yeah. Sorry, no. What we did in that was we sampled. So when you do qualitative sampling, of course, you can't get a representative sample, or you could, I suppose, but it's pretty difficult. So what we did was we went after particular populations that we wanted to know more about. So we did some Penn undergraduates, because that's the typical population. We went for people in and around Catholic schools. We thought that would be a nice group, so teachers and students. We got some just kind of like ordinary people in South Philly. We got ordinary people in central Pennsylvania and really rural places. We went after the Pakistani community that's in, believe it or not, in western Pennsylvania. So we kind of like targeted groups to try to find out what we wanted to see. And one of the things that we see is that there's this, as you could probably guess, there's a very large range of things that people accept about evolution, from evolution alone is responsible for all life, to God created all living things, including humans. Some people would even add, at one moment, or in 1 week, sometime in the last 10,000 years. And then there's lots of stuff in the middle, like, some kind of God or a spiritual force led to the formation of living things, or God, evolution happens as it says in the textbook, but God's somehow overseeing it, or the kind of Franklin sort of deistic thing, God sort of sets the universe into motion, and then the universe does its thing. So there's this pretty wide range of things that people believe. And so, now you know that this is the reality, that there's this very wide range of things that people believe. How do you turn that back into something that's quantitative and, can be sampled? So one thing to say right off the bat is there's no one way to do it. And so what I show you is simply a way to do it, but a very different way than Gallup. And what we wanted to do was try to capture capture better some of this middle ground, and at the same time try to separate the question of accepting evolution from an explicit, any kind of explicit statement that I am an atheist. So we wanted to try to develop a set of questions that would let someone who is a theist but who still believes, whatever the evolutionary biology textbooks say is true, to accept our naturalistic evolution answer. And we also wanted there to be room for someone that has some kind of vague, like, yeah, God's sort of responsible for it. He set everything into motion, but then the biology textbooks take over. So we wanted that set of answer choices. So here's how we asked the question. So we said, which of the following best describes how you think plants and animals came to exist on Earth? And then we gave kind of the Gallup kind of answer. Animals were created by God in more or less their current form. And then animals and plants developed through natural processes, but were guided by God the entire time. And then animals and plants developed through natural processes which were set up by God, but continued on their own. And then finally, animals and plants developed entirely through natural processes. So we just tried to take God out slowly, basically. And when you do it that way, you see a really, really different result than what Gallup sees. So first of all, you get many more just straight naturalistic evolutionists, 32% as opposed to 19%. And then you get many fewer straight creationists, 26%. And then you sort of break this middle range into theistic evolutionists and deists. And I'll come back and talk about the deists again later. These are the ones that say God set things into motion. What's interesting about this category is you might think, if you are a theist, like you believe that God exists and God set the universe into motion, this is your option, right? And so one of the things we actually see is we see people falling into this option out of the creationist bucket, who are the kind of smarter people, basically, to not to put a fine point on it. In data we're analyzing now from a second wave, we really try to ask how much of this effect's driven by the human versus talking about plants and animals, but we're not going to get into that today. The answer is, of course, much of it is. So who's more likely to accept evolution? Well, here's the stuff that's all not surprising, I think. It doesn't pass the grandmother test. You're more likely to accept evolution if you're less religious, you're not self-described as born again, you're more well-educated, you're less politically conservative, and you're less authoritarian. The last one we put in there, because I heard on the radio 2 days before the survey went live, that there's this social science scale or social psychology scale of authoritarianism, and it predicted Trump voters better than anything else. So it turns out it predicts creationists really well too. It's quite interesting. But this is not surprising, I think. Now, the question, though, to me is this it? Or does knowledge have something to do with accepting evolution or not? Now, you might think, well, of course it does. How could you, not accept something that how could you be a creationist if you know a lot about evolution? But it turns out that lots of previous literature has suggested that there's very little correlation between knowledge of evolution and acceptance of evolution, and some papers have gone so far as to claim that there's no correlation. And the ones that go so far as to claim there's no correlation get this effect because they, as always, are looking at undergraduates, and they find there is a subpopulation of undergraduates who are pre-meds who understand evolutionary biology very, very well, but they are also evangelical Christians. They tend to be from East Asian countries, and they score really high on the knowledge score, and they are creationists. So there's, believe it or not, in the public understanding of science literature, a lot of people will tell you that understanding and acceptance are not correlated. So I'm going to show you that they are, in fact, and are in interesting ways. And you might think, well, that's not really very interesting, but it is interesting in this literature. It's not been the standard view. Okay, so back to understanding. How good is it? So here's one of our subjects. The theory of evolution came from a scientist, and I cannot remember his name right now, but I studied this in school. Somehow matter came together and formed life. The interviewer says, can you elaborate a little more on that? Actually, no. Not a Penn undergraduate, don't worry. Interviewer asks, how did humans come to exist? Through the Big Bang Theory. I suppose it's sort of true in some remote kind of way, right? How did that happen? Through Adam and Eve, say. Can you tell me more? Just the whole evolutionary process, going back to the ape man, going through the years, everything evolved, we can trace their ancestors back to the apes. So this person doesn't know the difference between cosmology and evolution and thinks that apes and Adam and Eve are all kind of mixed up in it. One of the things that I hope is coming out here, and this is something that I must admit, maybe I'm just slow, but I think as academics, we tend to when there's a kind of misconception, we think that it's gotta there's got to be this definite proposition that they hold, that the people hold, that's wrong, and we have to go fix that thing. But I think one of the reasons I weave this qualitative material in is I hope you see that I think a lot of people's beliefs about these things are kind of it's like a puree more than any kind of distinct beliefs. And I think that's really important for us as educators to kind of keep in mind. I'm not going to proceed, I don't know how to analyze a puree, but it is really important. And I think it's probably true in lots of domains where we who think about technical matters all the time and work really hard to make our ideas clear come in contact to those that don't. Okay, so would you like to see what some of these people look like that are talking about evolution? Would that be interesting? Or we could skip that. What is it? Yeah, of course this is ethical. I have IRB approval to show you this. Do you not want to see it? Yeah. Okay.
Informed consent?
Of course. And plus, this is on Locust Walk. It's also very easy to. We wouldn't even need it, but we had it anyway. So anyway, the whole thing is IRB approved. Otherwise, you have to walk out right now. Are you the head of the IRB? No. Okay. Yeah, we have a different IRB. Yeah, I can show you. This is not the one. This is our one of our what do you call it? Researchers. But she's going to explain.
Today we talked.
But we need a little more volume. Oops, we lost it. Here it goes.
Today we talked to people walking down Locust Walk on Penn's campus just to see if we can stop and get anybody that would like to talk to us about evolution or about nature or life science, their opinions. Sometimes it was a little bit of both. Sometimes it had religion in it. It was very intriguing.
The ground.
What'd you say?
The ground.
The ground. So
Yeah.
say some more.
Huh?
Say some more.
The ground comes from the earth, dirt. That's pretty much, that's what I believe, that everything that is here comes from, dirt.
A tree dropping a seed and making another tree. Some people might say God. I'm not sure about that though.
Well, I guess it depends who you ask.
Let's start by asking you.
Asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I believe in a creation and evolution hybrid. So I believe that it was started with God, and that evolution taking place, changes in our climate, led the plants and animals to adapt to become the ones we see today, but not necessarily the ones that were there from the beginning.
There was the Big Bang, I suppose, is one theory, and then from that, things began to grow and become more and more complex, and from that, the plants and animals came.
Some people gave very scientific opinions, and some people gave very emotionally charged opinions.
The way my understanding of how life began and how it exists and how it evolves over time is with a healthy dose of skepticism and uncertainty.
More compelling than evolution. I guess the evolution theory is not compelling enough because they're like, how to say, the details, or say like the evolution process sometimes don't make sense. Like how people, it's simple to think people can evolve from monkeys, but it's kind of hard to think how monkeys like be existing in the world when there's nothing, like just the Big Bang and everything.
No, I do believe that God created humans, but I haven't looked into the evolutionist standpoint, but seeing as complex as the human body is, it's hard to believe that it's been able to evolve. Even if it's been over billions of years, it's hard to believe that it's evolved.
Same story or something different?
Same story, like came from monkeys.
I'll say that on Penn's campus there are a lot of people that are walking through that are very intelligent, very academic, could be professors, could be staff in some department, but because of that the opinions are a bit more articulate and more thought out. People might have had to come across and think about these things more often than maybe the general public.
I think I went to Bible study and learned about God, and I finally decide to follow him, so they become incompatible. I cannot like believe what Bible said, and at the same time believe the evolutionary theory.
I don't know why to me, the whole process is miraculous, but I don't have to posit a watchmaker to have put it together. In my imagination, I could see that.
So there's life, which I guess, so cellular life, cells divide and cells organize in different ways depending upon how their environment influences them. So natural selection suggests that the environment is selective for certain characteristics and traits so that things will organize in ways that facilitate their survival in any given context. So cells will begin to organize into more complex organisms that confer a greater likelihood of survival given predators and the environment.
The way we all grew up, like as a baby, you start from like a seed, an egg, then you put it together, and then you have a baby.
So deep.
Deep. Now we're just getting started. Okay, so these were not our real test subjects. These are just some other people that we talked to on Locust Walk. They're not actually in the main pool, just in case the camera bothered them. We normally did it with tape recorder, but I thought you'd like to see what this looks like. Okay, so we constructed a scale for understanding evolution by basically, it was actually incredibly tedious. The first thing we did was read every single paper that ever tried to have any kind of an understanding scale and pulled out all the questions and looked at them. And then one of the things that's a technique that actually a group that working with the National Science Foundation on the indicators came up with was always appending all of the questions with like scientists think, to try to emphasize that we're not asking you about your view, but what do scientists think about this? Because one of the things that happens, it becomes hard in the general public to what they accept and what they think they know kind of blend together. So we're trying to kind of force this out. So it's a bit tedious, but in every question there's some variation on, in this case, in what cases do scientists think that two skunks could have different patterns of stripes? This is an easy question. And so we made a range of questions that we took to be easy to very difficult. And then we did lots of piloting and used techniques like item response theory to try to actually create a scale that spreads out the difficulty of the questions from easy to difficult, so that we would not, all the existing instruments either were too easy or too hard. So you have a bunch of instruments that have basically everybody's scoring like they're geniuses about evolution, and other ones where no one gets the right answer. And that's one of the things that also drives these results about no correlation. If your instrument can't pick up the variation that's there, then you're not going to find any correlation. Okay, so that's an easy question, barely about evolution. Here's a much harder question about salamanders. All of our the harder questions all have these sort of distracting, nearly correct answers. I've been given a hard time about this particular one by biologists because it turns out there is this was meant to be a question that you had to understand stabilizing selection and the relaxation of stabilizing selection in order to get it right, but it might be that there actually was some directional selection for salamander eyes, but this is kind of the hardest end of our scale. So we have easy questions, hard questions, and lots of questions in the middle, and they distribute like that. When we run this scale in a nationally representative sample, we find similarly, with acceptance of evolution, people are more likely to understand evolution if they're less religious, more well-educated, less conservative, less authoritarian, and more well-versed in the nature of science, which we'll come back to at the end. So it turns out that there is a relationship between acceptance and evolution. So this is just looking at acceptance and evolution. On the x-axis here, we have this scale of understanding, and on the y-axis, we have the probability of being in one of these four categories by the understanding score. And you can see from this that the creationists, the red, and the theistic evolutionists are less likely they have a lower average understanding score than the deistic evolutionists and the naturalistic evolutionists. There's another way of looking at it where we just collapse, there's a natural break, it seems, between creationists and theistic evolutionists. They have an active role for God, and deistic evolutionists and naturalistic evolutionists that have either a passive or no role for God, and they definitely separate. So there's clearly a correlation between understanding and acceptance. Now that's already a finding that other people haven't seen, but is this the best? Yes. What I think is really interesting is this diagram. Sorry for the scatter, it doesn't really look very good here, but what about for any given level of religiosity or for any given degree of political ideology, do you still see correlation between understanding and acceptance? So in this graph here, we have understanding here on the x-axis, the probability of actually being an evolutionist, so it's not even sort of being a deistic evolutionist, but just saying, I accept evolution. And this Pew class, this is, we don't ask people, are you Catholic? I mean, we do ask them that, but that's not how we determine whether they're religious. The Pew the Pew Center for Religious Life has an instrument which basically looks at things like how often you attend church, how important in your life God is, how often do you pray, that kind of stuff. And that's what's used to determine how religious people are, not what church do they say that they belong to. And it turns out that for those that are below an average religiosity, just increasing your understanding of evolution makes you more likely to actually be a naturalistic evolutionist. For those that have above average religiosity, there's actually a very slight decline for acceptance for being an evolutionist with increasing knowledge. And that's because the very few people that are in this region here, those that really understand evolution and also who are very religious, they respond to this by becoming deists, which is really interesting, I think. If you actually, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. The same basic pattern holds for political ideology. Yeah.
Where does the Catholic Church now stand on it?
They have accepted. Yeah, they're basically evolution, some kind of deists, except for humans. But one thing that's known about the Catholic Church from colleagues of mine work on climate is that rank and file Catholics and the Church have very kind of different things. Basically, rank and file Catholics there's the, I don't know what for Jews they call them twice a year Jews. I don't know what they're called for Catholics. Are there twice a year Catholics too? World Series Catholics, yeah. So there are those, and then there are the ones that are kind of really religious. I mean, like in Philadelphia, so the really religious ones, they don't like Pope Francis, they don't like what's coming out of the church. And then the World Series ones, or if that's what they're called, they like, they're fine with all of those things. So I don't think the church hierarchy predicts very well that. Again, and even within evangelical churches, the primary organized evangelical groups like Church of Christ and things like that, they of course are very anti-evolution. One of the major drivers of this anti-evolutionism in this country, but there's also these kind of left-wing evangelical, the kind of like Jesus was a hippie movement, and they seem to have no problem with evolution. So that's why looking at this kind of like thing, when people say, how often do you pray, that's a better indicator, and that's what we've tried to do. I just want to close this bit by saying that the thing that we've been starting to look at lately is not just knowledge of evolution per se, but also kind of knowledge of scientific method. So here, this is my all-time favorite subject number 18. So the experimenter asks, why do you think a lot of scientists say evolution is the right explanation for how all species came to be? This question we asked everybody we interviewed, whether they were, we asked the creationists why they thought the biologists accepted evolution. We asked people that accepted evolution why they thought other people didn't accept evolution. We really wanted to get to their, what was their how did they reflect on the epistemology of science, the epistemology of religion, and so forth. So number 18. Scientists are probably the worst ones of the lot. The beliefs they believe, they think they know things, but man's knowledge is foolishness. If you follow these things and you listen to these people, you see the idiocy there. Grant you that they do have some nice points here and there, but a lot of things they say, you may as well make a cartoon out of them because that's about the basis of it. Not to knock these men, they probably have some nice credentials. So there we are. That's well thought out. Same guy. Okay, so what does it mean it's just a theory? As a theory, it's just bunk. It's bunk. Can you explain a little more about that? Yes, because they claim that man came from monkeys. Well, you don't see a monkey walking around now with all legs and talking to you. A monkey is a monkey is a monkey. A man was created in God's image. A man is a man, and that's it. It's just as plain as there. There's really no other basis for that. A rock is still a rock, and nothing crawled out of it. The fish were put in the sea by our Lord, and they stayed fish. How's that? So this is what this guy, I mean, it's not like he's never thought about this, right? He clearly has. No, I mean, this is the satisfying argument. We have another study, actually, where we look at what creationists and evolutionists take to be good evidence. And it's really interesting. So everybody takes what science says to be good evidence. That's something, it's a kind of misconception that everybody thinks it's good evidence. The question, and unsurprisingly, creationists take what the Bible says to be good evidence and evolutionists don't. But what's really interesting is that creationists take, it feels true in my heart, or feels true in my gut to be good evidence, and the rest of us don't. So I think there's lots of interesting, we're trying to almost get a kind of general psychological profile. Okay, I already got that. So,
was that a student who wrote that?
no, that was an adult. That was an adult. And it wasn't written, it was said. And I mean, so yeah, we basically see this is kind of data we're analyzing now, that there's a pretty high correlation between measures of, the education literature calls it nature of science. I would call it, methodology of science, philosophy of science, and acceptance and understanding. And there's also this other instrument that people have developed called the ordinary science intelligence, and that's basically, it's a kind of hodgepodge of scientific reasoning tasks, and we also see high correlation between that and understanding and acceptance. So I already told you about that. Let me just skip forward in the interest of time. What we want to do is to try to, why is it showing that? We want to try to actually create an intervention that's based on these things that we know. So one of the things that we've learned, I think, is that you can, actually educating people about the content of the theory really does change their attitudes about evolution. It just has to be done in the right kind of way. It has to be done in this way that's not this deeply polarizing way. And that's not just known for evolution. It's also known for the other areas that people think about this a lot these days, especially climate. I know in Penn Medicine, there's a lot of thought about vaccines. One of your colleagues is an expert on teaching people about vaccines. But one of the keys, it clearly, is to find ways of talking about it that don't force people into thinking I have to choose between being a religious person and being an evolutionist. If you can just present things on the basis of the facts. But all that said, that's still, that's a kind of obvious recommendation. So how can we improve it? So one of the things that our group has been trying to do is experiment with methods of kind of mass indoctrination. No, I'm just kidding. With, informal science education, it gets really called. And so the question is it possible to teach these ideas in a better way? And it's an interesting question to ask because, we sciencey people, we have our documentaries that we like. I assume that many of you, like me, enjoy watching whatever David Attenborough has come up with. And lots of people report that they like doing that. Although I think also it turns out that people find it a bit boring. They might like it, but they find it boring. I find even I kind of fidget after a while. So there's something about the way that science is taught in these places that are not, even when it's brought down to an appropriate level, and even when the pictures get really beautiful, there's something that is less compelling perhaps than it could be. One of the things that's interesting, for those of you who are interested in film more generally, science documentaries have remained basically in the film Stone Age. So even though the BBC spends enormous amounts of money on the best technology and has the most beautiful pictures, the way that the film is shot is exactly the same way that things were done not 100 years ago, but 70 or 80 years ago. It's a very, very traditional style of filmmaking. So that's I've always thought that's very weird, right? There's a few exceptions. So did any of you see Born in China? So Disney and BBC together made this documentary, and what their approach was to Disneyfy it. So they anthropomorphize completely, and they had these three families that they followed. So they did the epic sweep of the BBC, but with a kind of, a Disney-style narrative. But, all the other techniques that people use in modern filmmaking, and even in modern documentary filmmaking, have not really been explored. So one of the things that we've been doing, I'll just show you very briefly, is to say, to isolate a single topic in evolutionary biology and to try to actually present it in different ways and literally do an experiment. I have 3 or 4 minute shorts, and we teach one thing, one topic, and we see, did people learn better from different methods of presentation, and were they more engaged by different methods of presentation? So this is the first version. No. Let me just make sure that this is actually the right version. No. Why this is not starting, I'm not sure. Gigantic tortoises once roamed the earth, but now they can only be found on a few remote islands, such as here in the Galapagos. There are about 35,000 tortoises on these islands, but not all of them look the same. These are dome tortoises, When the first tortoises came to these islands a few million years ago, they probably looked like this. Because the neck sections of their shells or carapaces point forward or downward, they can easily eat the plentiful and lush vegetation that is available on the ground. If these tortoises lived in a dry environment, they would have trouble getting food. But some of the giant tortoises living on the islands today do live in dry environments, and these tortoises look different. These are called saddleback tortoises because their shells, their carapaces, rise up in the front above their heads. This is how these tortoises survive in dry environments, where food is not available on the ground. But how did saddleback tortoises come to exist if all the tortoises that used to live on these islands were dome-shaped? The key to answering this question is to notice variation. Even though all of these tortoises are dome-shaped, each one is a little different. We can see these differences if we look at the V-shaped area of their carapaces, the two scales at the spot where the head sticks out. Some of these tortoises have their neck scales pointing forward or downward, but some other tortoises have these scales pointed a little bit upwards. These individuals can reach their necks a little bit higher, and when food on the ground is scarce, if a tortoise can reach a little higher, it can get more food than the others. More food usually means more offspring, and these offspring inherit the higher shell trait. So very slowly, over many generations, there will be more and more tortoises with higher shells on the driest islands. Eventually, tortoises that live in these dry environments end up looking like the saddleback tortoises we see today. Okay, so very standard, like, I'm not saying I'm as interesting as David Attenborough, but kind of presented in this like very, the same kind of like, modest music. When I show my students, I thought it reminded me of film strips when I was in school, but they don't do film strips apparently anymore. So they said, this is their 8th grade class. They watch videos like this. So now we said, well, what if we took exactly that, as close as we could match the information and shot it more like a contemporary documentary would be shot. Not a contemporary science documentary, but one about people.
What difference have you found of this male compared with the one we saw before? If I was a tourist, what would be the easiest way for me to understand the differences?
Just by opening your eyes. That is the best way. Most people don't want to see these differences, these variations, but they are present everywhere. In nature, everywhere, not only in the Galapagos. Each individual. It's like you and I. You're fine, but I'm handsome.
All right, okay.
You see, that's what makes us the difference, and this variation, these differences occur in nature. Everywhere you look around, each individual, there are not identical drops of water.
So I'm not gonna, in the interest of time, I won't play the whole thing, but basically it goes on like this, where it's this kind of discussion between two naturalists, it's more, it was directed a little bit, but it's sort of, the idea is it's more like, there's no narration really, it's all coming from within. So, I'm sorry to say that people don't learn more from the new styles, and maybe that's why the BBC, maybe they figured it out that it works better that way. But they are much more engaged, and we have other, more and more weirder and experimental types. Also, we made one that's cut a little more like almost a reality TV sort of thing, where you see a lot of making of segments. So we're experimenting with this form a little bit, and also really trying to use, insofar as we can, what we're learning from the empirical work on public's attitudes and understanding to kind of try to shape these pieces of film. Let me just also say that before I end and take your questions, this is what Howard mentioned as the other thing that's taking up the majority of my time, dealing with the Ecuadorian bureaucracy, which is vast. Ecuadorian IRBs make ours look non-bureaucratic, if you can imagine. But basically, Penn is now involved at the my group, starting with my group, but kind of moving outwards at the university level in an agreement with various entities in Galapagos, including the National Park, the Charles Darwin Foundation, and the Naturalist Guides. And the idea is that we are trying to create, in the Galapagos archipelago, a dual-pronged approach. One is we're trying to create really ethically responsible educational and research opportunities for Penn faculty and students. Happy to talk about what that could look like for any of you that might be interested. And at the same time, you know, those of you who haven't been there may not know, there are people that live in Galapagos, 30,000 Galapagos that live in 3% of the land, 97% of its national park, 3% is a place that people can live, and they're really on the front lines of conservation. It's a place that has 95% of its biodiversity remaining because the Polynesians didn't find it, basically. So it was more or less left intact until some Germans and Norwegians started trying to settle it in the 1930s and 40s. But it's, you know, under absolutely massive stress by this growing population. There's no new immigration, but the population increases naturally. And there's very little water, there's very little food, so almost everything's shipped in. So we are working, rather than just kind of the normal top-down telling people don't use plastic, don't do this, don't do that, what we're actually doing is working with communities, with students and other members of the community to actually do real research projects, and in particular on things that are of interest to them, like how humans and sea lions interact. And so we, Penn, are trying to sponsor that research conducted in part by the community as a way of really involving them in understanding the place they live in and the management of it. So I like to think that this is all of a piece of understanding how Americans think in bad ways about evolution, but, you know, truth be told, these are separate projects. So just kind of then finishing, I think it's extremely important that those of us like Howard and I, who have a long history of trying to sponsor efforts of approaching the public about evolution, acceptance, and understanding, don't just take it to be merely a matter of just telling them more things will help. I think the public does need to learn more about evolution. I think what we can show is that those that do know more about evolution are more likely to accept it, but some real care has to be given to where the public is, to exactly what kinds of ways of presenting evolution just kind of lights people's, you know, the ideology filters up in their mind. How can we depolarize these things? And the best way I think we can do it is by trying to really understand where people are. So I like this combination of talking to people, qualitative methods along with the quantitative methods, but there is much more work to be done in this area. And so we are continuing to work on the stuff about nature of science, but also, you know, hopefully in the future we'll think about other areas, climate being a big one of them, but perhaps you guys as the medical school faculty have other areas that we should be looking at as well. And now I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Okay, so yes. Oh, nice to see you, Reed. I think I saw you back there, yeah. My other old boss. Thank you.
I have a sense that there's an increasing skepticism of science in general, as perhaps evidenced by some of Trump's cabinet secretaries.
So you mean very, very recently?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting because, are you asking me if that's true?
Well, in essence. And
okay.
So what's it based on? A concern about the technology, techniques of science, or bias?
So I can't, you know, it may be that something has changed in the last year, but prior to that is where I know more about it. There is this perception that we, inside the academic community, have that there's lack of trust of science. That the research does not bear this out. When you ask these questions generally, scientists in the scientific community are actually held to, there's a lot of extremely good things that are said about scientists in the scientific community. The trust in science and scientists is very, very high. And that's one of the reasons I think that these particular issues like evolution, climate, vaccines are so interesting, because it's actually quite against the norm. Now, there seems to be a general erosion in expertise somehow, and I wonder whether something hasn't changed in the last year or two. And so I think that would be really worth looking at. The person on this campus who probably knows more about this than anybody is Kathleen Hall Jameson, and she runs inside the Annenberg Public Policy Center, which I should have thanked for having helped us pilot some of these things. There is this program they have on science, the science of science communication. I think what they do is really great, but I do think that the issue is not just about communication. I mean, they're obviously very focused on the message. And they, at the moment, have the National Academy's year about this. So the National Academies have been doing webinars and things on how to communicate science in a way that's not politically polarizing. But I also think that there are these kind of epistemic issues about trust and about knowledge production that need to really, we need better ways of talking about. To just take one example, this is a climate kind of example. So if you look at the more, there's obviously just like, blowhards, but if you look at the more sophisticated versions of the climate deniers, they find they do find the parts of the science it's not that it's weak, but that it's the most epistemically opaque or complex. For example, a lot of work in climate requires reconstruction of climate data going backwards in time. The further back you go, the less reliable the data, even if it's using data that's been measured. So you often, from let's say the early 20th century temperature records, they're just not as carefully kept as modern ones are. So very reasonably, the people that look at that data, if they see one data point that really jumps out compared to the ones that are located in space around it, they use some kind of a correction on it. They either toss the data point or they average it or something like that. And in fact, if they didn't do that, they would be just doing something wrong. But if you look at the outside, if you're looking from the outside and your view about how science works is, well, you push the button on the machine and it tells you the answer, which is basically the level that people of understanding of science that many people have, that's going to look really, really bad. Or if you think that scientists have some kind of a empirical omniscience or something, so you walk into the lab and everything you need to know, you have either in working memory or you find it out yourself, as opposed to the reality, which is all of scientific knowledge is produced by this incredibly distributed community through space and time, and each expert is really an expert on this one narrow area that really depends on all of their, in this complex network. That's not how science is presented to the public, and hence I don't think it's irrational for people to be surprised when that's not what they see. So this is where I think that we might work. I mean, I think if we can somehow, I know, like, for example, in this recent teach-in, there was this idea of like pulling back the curtain on what's going on here, but I don't think that we did a good job pulling the curtain back on that aspect. That knowledge is is produced by this really complex network of people that work together, and that knowledge at the frontiers has lots of uncertainty, and that's why it's interesting and motivates many of us to keep doing it. So that's the kind of thing that I think we could work on. Has something changed under Trump? I don't know. Have the forces of darkness been unleashed, or has something actually changed? I would love to see if, I'll have to ask people if they've redone these trust in scientist studies. Congress is always down here, firefighters are like here, scientists just below the firefighters. So the heroes, right? My children like that, yeah. They only had diggers too, right? Yes?
So that set of studies you just described so beautifully, has that been done in England and in other parts of the world?
So yeah, okay, so not what we have, so the full extent of it not. I mean, what we've done basically is we've taken so you've had in this field basically two kinds of studies. You've had fairly substantial studies on college undergraduates and very shallow studies in the general public, and the Gallup being the latter, right? So they have good representative samples with shallow studies. That's what's been done mostly both of those have been done in England, but not the combination. It is definitely true that acceptance is much higher in England. Now, when acceptance is higher, that doesn't mean understanding is higher. So people can be accepting things that they don't understand. We actually have been collaborating with a group in China, which is an even more extreme case. So acceptance is really high in China. But you know why acceptance is so high in China? It was really, really important part of well, even before the Cultural Revolution, even before communism in China, but evolutionary thinking became part of the culture, and the way that evolution was introduced was not by Darwin, but by Spencer. And so ideas about competition between nations became extremely important, and certain slogans became really important. So I actually have a paper about this if anyone's interested. But it's when you survey the Chinese public about their knowledge of evolution, it's just as low as anywhere else. It's just that those words mean something different. And similarly in the United States, this is something that we haven't gotten into as much as I'd like, but if you wonder, well, why is it such a problem here? Well, I think this is basically a historical explanation. I was hoping, it's a kind of cognitive science explanation, but I think the reality is that in the early 20th century, the organized evangelical movements made a specific decision that evolution and abortion were going to be the places that they were going to fight. And they picked abortion for the North and evolution for the South. And we have the legacy of that. And that's why for some people, when you say evolution, that means, atheism. And it doesn't really, we can tie ourselves into knots, but if that's what people are going to hear, that's what they hear. Just as people hear climate change, accepting climate change means liking Al Gore in some people's minds. And I mean this bluntly. And so we have, there are these, Dan Kahan has these nice papers about these Kentucky farmers who literally will buy insurance policies to protect themselves against changes to the land that climate change is going to induce. And they'll buy the right kind of seeds, and they'll buy very expensive maps that show which crops should go where as the temperatures rise, but they will not accept climate change because that is just, because they need, fuck Al Gore, so we can't accept climate change. And, it seems totally irrational, but if we're going to change it, we have to understand it, I think. I don't feel like I understand it, but I can at least name the phenomenon. Marco Rubio took the money to move the highway, the main highway in Miami, but says he doesn't accept climate change. I mean, with a politician, you never have to necessarily believe what they say, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with. Long answer to your question. Yes?
So I was wondering about, so in the very last film you showed, one of the gentlemen said, all you have to do is look.
Yeah, it's not true, right?
But I wonder if that's part of it. So to me, one of the problems is that people tend not to actually analyze data, right? They're not taught to. And I wonder if you would agree with that as being part of the problem, not just for evolution, but for climate change,
Yeah, I mean, well, let's start with our undergraduates, right, at Penn. I mean, we could start even here. So most undergraduates who've even been exposed to statistics, that basically means to them, some tests that they learn how to run. They're, often not just like, I don't know, the way I learned it was first you plot your data and you take a look at it, and then you begin, statistics are a way of describing the data. But that idea of like, beginning to get a feel for it.
Right, so my question then is, do you think there are ways that we could alter our approach to education to improve people just become more naturally analytical?
Yeah, that's it. Well.
And maybe that starts in third grade or something.
Yeah, I'm sure it starts really early, right? Yeah. So I think.
That's really the problem.
No, I think that is part of the problem. I think getting people to feel like they can begin to. Because actually, yeah, if you think about, take climate. So one of the things that the scientists that work on this say, look, all the data is available. Anybody who wants can come look at it. Now, but of course, that's a totally naive thing to say, right? Because, and also, I don't know what you all do, but most of us are not equipped. Even those of us that know statistics and have understand the basic physics, we still can't really. That's its own thing. So trying to cultivate that habit, though, and really thinking about science education as teaching a kind of approach to reasoning as much as anything else. I think that is the answer. I absolutely agree with you. How exactly to do it?
is now trying to take the data away from people.
Well, of course, yeah. Luckily, it's been the Data Refuge project. It's been stored elsewhere.
But they're starting this data secrecy rule, which any like the study that you show here with IRBs and stuff. Anything that
right.
takes the primary data away from the public in the form of anonymity and confidentiality. They're trying to take that away from their policy decisions.
No, absolutely. So it seems. That seems like though yet another problem. So there's it should be available. It seems like all these pushes towards more requiring repositories and everything is really good for science. But even down at kindergartners, they're not going to be analyzing the data in the databases. But I think giving them confidence about their own ability to engage in scientific reasoning and keeping that up. My wife is a developmental psychologist, and one of the things she studies is how children come to understand what science is and how they think about scientific reasoning and causal reasoning and so forth. It's very interesting that kids bifurcate fairly early to the ones that think science is basically they think science is chemistry. They sometimes say potions, but they see science as very much a kind of bench laboratory activity, and other ones that see it as a kind of process of finding out about the world. Unfortunately, the latter category is the minority, but it seems like promoting that understanding that you can do science about anything and that science is a kind of way of approaching the world, that would be great. Part of the problem we have, of course, is a really fundamental problem. It's hard to attract the right kind of people into the classroom. A teacher has to be quite confident in her abilities to approach teaching science in that sort of super open-ended way, I think. The average high school biology teacher in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is someone who was basically a B or a C student at a Penn State branch campus, which means there are several standard deviations on the SAT below the Penn undergraduates. And I find sometimes the Penn undergraduates are challenged to get them to think in these ways. So, you know, I'm not to criticize any of these things. I just think that seems to me, you know, what could we do that would be really, you know, really address this if we were really, really serious? If we wanted the like Apollo program for this, it would be to work there, I think. To basically, I sometimes think of it as we need to create like an academic middlebrow culture. The thing that is to opera like musicals are, we need that for intellectual life. So in some countries, like in Germany and France, there is this sense that you could go be a high school teacher, and it's not like, you know, it's not a clerical thing. Like it's a really respectable kind of life's calling, and you're part of a kind of, you know, intellectual community somehow that could be really appealing. I think that we just don't have that. I mean, if we could, you know, that's something that I don't know how to do, but it seems like we need to change that level where we, you know, down to the kindergarten level. We want our students from Penn to go be kindergarten teachers, but that's not happening. So maybe we can. So I think what we really need is a revolution, but that's a, you know, I don't do that kind of philosophy.
It isn't just science that we're talking about here. We're talking about reasoning.
Yeah.
We want really kids to learn how to reason.
Yeah.
So they can understand not just science, but
That's why. So I mean, that's taking us. I think it's like taking a scientific approach to in general. How to make a good argument, and in many ways, it's even better to get them not to necessarily tag it as science. I mean, sometimes I talk to little kids like, think about you have a court case. You're bringing evidence. What would that look like? How do you weigh things? That's like dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty. That's a hard thing. I mean, we're used to it, but I think, you know, many people, they don't know that they can do that, and they don't know that they can learn new things. So, I mean, this all sounds like an advertisement for philosophy of science. What can I say? But seriously, yeah, if you, any other questions? Yeah.
So what are some of what you were suggesting sounded to me a little bit like the frameworks model with Matt Kendall-Taylor?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself in that realm? And if so, what is the framework?
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's a good question. Tell me how you see it.
Well, I see it as understanding the audience first.
Yeah.
And then once you understand the audience, then you tailor the message to that audience.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's true. I guess I was wondering if you had anything more specific in mind. So we certainly, you know, it's definitely the case that you can't just assume that you know, sometimes in a disparaging way, this kind of thing I was saying with Kathleen Hall-Jamieson and that crew about the science communication people, they call it the knowledge deficit model. That's the thing that they're against. The idea that you just have to say more facts and then people will eventually come around to it. You just say more times that vaccines are effective and climate change is real. And, you know, there's, you know, and if you think about even the rhetoric in climate especially, it was always like 99% of scientists agree about this. And somehow, if that's not getting through the first 100 times, why do you think it's going to get through the 101st time? And so, what exactly is if you want to think in a framework model, what is it that's blocking it? So, I guess I didn't think in those terms. I simply thought, like, what is it why are they not hearing it? And what beliefs do they have that are blocking it? But maybe that is a better way to think about it.
So I think they did one study up in Canada. They were looking, I think, at some social network program, and it was very unsuccessful. It was tailored towards the humanitarian approach.
Mm-hmm.
And they then polled, and it turned out that there were, of the various approaches, the economic approach was the one that people resonated to. So when they changed the message to, well, you need to do this because it's going to help the economy, it was much more successful. So in a sense that you need to know what's important to the audience and what they're willing to accept.
Yeah, so a good example of that is if you get people that you think are very likely based on demographics to not accept climate change, and you want to interest them in it, you basically take like a popular mechanics kind of approach, as opposed to a Scientific American approach. You say like, look at this cool new technology that's going to, you know, get the carbon out of the atmosphere and help with the problem of temperature going. And then people are, then that appeals to a certain thing, or call it tactical. You know, here's a tactical approach to, you know, one thing with the climate data, the exact same data with the NASA stamp or the military stamp on the bottom has a really different reaction than the NOAA stamp on the bottom, which is, again, it seems to us like infuriating and absurd, but it actually is effective. So I definitely endorse all of that. I just don't want to lose, while we're doing that, maybe we could try to solve some of the underlying problem if we could think of better ways to get people to begin to take seriously their own ability to reason.
I always felt that the Al Gore's message of making climate change global was a disaster.
Yeah, well, right, exactly. He falls foul of all these things we're talking about, right?
And that what he did was he moved something from the local pollution level to the global scale.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept on message, or the earlier message of the EPA on the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, and you can add on to that the crops that will grow in your fields.
Mm-hmm.
The economic message that it would make it much more personal, and the end result would be the same, which is a decarbonization, because most of it comes back to the fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm sure. I mean, there's so many things wrong with. I mean, even though in many ways I admire what he was trying to do, there are so many things wrong with it. It was also, it was demonizing particular groups and particular industries and particular livelihoods, and it was, it was giving the most extreme scenarios and not really describing how there's really this range of possibilities and we don't really know what we're going to do. So there's so many things that he did badly there. And a lot of people I'm more on the evolution side. A lot of people that work in that field feel like he set the cause back quite a lot, which is really interesting, especially considering he was working on it for a long time too. And then when he went and did his tour, and then he did it again with the second tour. So it was very sad and surprising. Any other questions? I'm happy to stay around and talk in person.
Didn't Gore's thing kickstart the movement?
Way back, he kickstarted the movement. Yeah, he's one of the, and then but the also then the new movement. And Howard has the last question. Yes.
How much harm is done by Teach the Controversy?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me how much harm is done by Richard Dawkins. Probably not. Yeah, Teach the Controversy. You mean like, is it a bad thing if we teach the controversy, or?
Well, no, that in certain school districts, teachers are required to say evolution is a theory. On the other hand, we have other things like intelligent design.
Well, they're not allowed to be required to do that anymore. That was part of the case. It keeps trying. You were saying, would that be such a bad thing if it happens, or?
No, I'm just wondering how much, because I think a lot of teachers have to say that there are alternate ideas.
No, not really. I mean, all those cases, all the disclaimers, all those things, they get shot down. But no, that's the official. I mean, I think there's not been really careful study of this, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests a lot of teachers just don't teach much about evolution, or do put the hedges on it, or put it. There's the last topic that's covered in the year, so that there's not much on the Teach the Controversy. I mean, there's what's pernicious about that position is that I think Americans, for all of our now very obvious flaws, tend to be kind of very interested in kind of balance and democracy. So it sounds very appealing. Like, well, what harm could there be by talking about both sides of an issue? And so I think that it is a very worrisome kind of movement. But as of yet, I mean, part of it's that the creationists are just not very bright, I think, and they keep coming up with dumb answers. But the other thing is that there's no evidence that there's any research program here. It really is just obviously religion masquerading. If they actually got sophisticated and they really made a real alternative research program, then I think we would have trouble because the courts wouldn't have no basis of deciding it anymore. Thank you so much, Howard.
Thank you.
Thank you.